trade was quarterly, and thank you all for being here. As usual, in this volume also we focus on India's trade with the rest of the world, giving a very comprehensive view of what are the markets, the composition of the markets, the destination trades and everything. And then, as usual, we also focus on a thematic sector, that is gems and jewelry this time. It's very important sector in the sense not only it contributes significantly, almost 70%, 7% of the manufacturing GDP, it employs 50 lakhs workers. And in fact, the output multiplier of gems and jewelry sector is much higher, close to 4.41 compared to other labor-intensive sectors like textiles, footwear, and underwear. So we are focusing on that, bringing out how do we really do in the world market for the demand and supply, whether there is alignment of India's gems and jewelry exports to the rest of the world. And finally, the last sections, as we always cover about the developments in the world that have implications for India's trade. So let me quickly run through the trade.
From April to December 25, and as Dr. Sahu has explained at length, during this period India continued to maintain its momentum of trade growth, and not only was there an increase in the trade in merchandise and services, we also diversified the export basket with new countries like Northeast Asia and Africa. A very interesting part of this report is the analysis for the gems and jewelry sector. And as Prabhakar has explained, India has traditionally been has had a very strong position in the diamond sector, in the processing of diamonds, providing employment to a large number of people. But the report also highlights the changes in the consumer preferences, in the kind of new value additions which are happening all over the world, and to remain competitive, India needs to do much more, focus on value addition more, needs to remain competitive in the global value chain. And the report also highlights a number of recommendations like reducing logistic costs and transaction costs in order for India to remain competitive in this sector. So with these words, I commend Dr. Sahu and his team who have been working diligently in bringing out this report, and we hope to maintain this momentum in the future also. Thank you.
Given all this uncertainty, we also have to think of that, and as Dr. Sahu and his team have shown, the HHI index is showing a increase in diversification. So it is happening. Now, what is the role of FTAs in this? We often forget that among the earliest FTAs we signed were with Japan, then South Korea and ASEAN. So again, if I have understood his analysis correctly, it's the Northeast where the diversification is now happening. Maybe there was a lag, maybe the conditions are right now. The South Korean president is visiting right now, hopefully, and I'm not talking inside information, I don't know, but I would expect the Japanese PM also to visit. So it doesn't happen always that FTA instantaneously leads to the thing, but the whole idea of FTAs is to diversify to meet this pattern. That's the main point I'm saying. So in many areas, so from these we went to Australia, was the only Southeast Asian country, so to say, where we didn't have an FTA. We went to the Gulf UAE FTA, and then looking forward the UK, New Zealand, EU, USA. So you could think of part of this as diversifying to meet what is the demand, rather than just ourselves thinking, oh, we can only supply this. You have to look at the markets. Diversification is about what is the demand out there. On the import side, it's a little tricky because the whole issue of you can't just look at the manufacturing, but you also have to look at the minerals separately, metals, because they are concentrated. Resources are concentrated across the world. It is not like manufacturing where in principle they could be made everywhere. But minerals and metals, agricultural imports against resource-based stuff, energy. These you have to look in the context of where they are found, so to say. And here, what we learned from the recent period is that one has to be greater sensitivity to geography, the choke points. Now, conventionally, you would think the areas closest to us, which is I'm just taking that as an example, the areas closest to us, which were the Middle East, we should import the most because logistic costs are less. However, we did diversify far away, like Russian fields on the east coast, on the west, etc. So it's a trickier issue. It's more difficult. There's no simple answer because you're balancing logistic risk with logistic cost, so to say. So I leave that issue and just a few words on gems and jewelry. DC has to go. I visited the gems and jewelry sector is actually one of the most, surprisingly, it's the most decentralized but most organized. So I visited an association where they were training workers in skills. So it's organized enough to train the workers they need in skills. Now this is very important because if you mate it with what Prabhakar just told you and his team has discovered, that there are many markets where we are not exporting. We are kind of underweight in terms of the point I raised earlier. And why is that?
Let me first acknowledge the enormous amount of work that it takes to produce something like this quarter by quarter. And I do have to say that at a time of both turbulence and uncertainty in the area of international trade, the fact that members of the press and the general public can look to somewhere authoritative and analytical, hopefully user-friendly, for an update on how India is doing in the area of trade, I think is valuable and impressive, and I see that as being represented by the fact that media interest remains in these launches. Let me also say that in the person of Dr. Sahu himself, we also produced the Fiscal Health Monitor, and that attracted a great deal of attention. Honorable Finance Minister, in a speech, an important speech he gave at NIPFP, referred to this. And I think the point is that that objectivity and an analytic but user-friendly interface, these are the kinds of things that NITI aims for. So let me just make 3 or 4 points about, as it were, trade, and also specifically gems and jewelry, to add to the detailed analysis of Dr. Sahu based on the work of his team, and of course what both CEO and member AB have had to say. I think the first point on aggregate trade, which Dr. Sahu did not dwell on, but it is in his PowerPoint and certainly in the volume, is that yes, merchandise trade has been resilient in a tough environment, tough in terms of policy, tough in terms of competition, but that despite many of the apprehensions, and the future is not like the past, services trade continues to be strong. And so in a very confusing year, 2025, for us to come out, as it were, floating or sort of resilient, speaks to a number of things. It speaks to government policy, it speaks to the sector itself. Frankly, in comparison with some of the dark foreboding of people on Trump's Liberation Day, April 2nd, I'm not sure many people would have thought almost exactly a year later that this is where we would be. So, it's not for no reason that for 20 years, India has continued to be, on average, growing at 6% per year. So there is something bright going on, and I hope the public, the press, will communicate that it's not all gloom and doom. So that's my first point. If I could go now to the second point, which has to do with trade, maybe also with gems and jewelry. Let's be clear that FTAs are not a one-way street, nor should they be. Which is to say that in the way that we are seeing them as a tool for market access, others are seeing it as a tool for market access to us. And I'm a fairly diligent reader of the UK Financial Times, and it has every quarter or so gems and jewelry special fold-out. And the lead article in one of them was that UK jewelers and watch companies were looking to the FTA to expand their presence in the Indian market. So I'm not saying that that's direct competition to our gems and jewelry sector, but I think the larger point should be, and I think this is absent from our debate, is that for trade economists, imports matter much more than exports. It's imports that force you to be competitive. And we, therefore, it's a different matter that some people may so-called game the system, but we should welcome the imports as much as we welcome the market access. The third point I would make is the one that Dr. Vimani has already made, but I think is vitally important. So, in many of the insights that we get from Honorable Prime Minister, who is the chair of NITI Aayog, he very much sees now India's next stage as being about design and design-intensive production. Design, branding, all of these are the ways in which you gain a niche in the market. And in this room, we had a presentation last week from the World Gold Council, and what came up in the discussion is that the Indian consumer is very committed to 23, 24 carat jewelry. But if you go to Dubai Airport or Dubai Souk or something, they are often marketing 14 carat because that is what the market wants. And they have figured that out. And I think there's a larger point that if you've got a giant domestic jewelry sector, then to cast your eyes on what people outside, be it artificial jewelry or 14 carat, it takes an effort of will and of branding, and I think brands like Tanishq of Tata, etc., are attempting to do that, to recognize there's a world out there which is not the same world as the world you have here. Let me also say, in the FTA states, the fact that the trade between India and Belgium, between Surat and Antwerp, is so vibrant, I can only imagine that having the EU FTA in place, it will also improve our competitiveness in the processing of roughs. But my final point, which again goes back to the EU, which I follow quite closely, having lived and worked there for 4 years, is I always feel that there are very important lessons that India has to learn from the evolution of Italy since the last World War, the last 80 years. Italy was a completely, as it were, shattered country, having been on the losing side of the Second World War. But, like us, it had traditions in textiles, in design, in jewelry, and it was as much local governments, communes, trade associations that basically took Italy in textiles from where they were to Armani, Loro Piano, etc., or in jewelry, Bulgari. So, I think and I'm hoping that the investment that accompanies the FTA with the EU as and when it is finally signed, that we will be attractive because we have a giant domestic market, and we will welcome a lot of these foreign design houses because that is the way in which, as it were, the value added, the productivity of our workers and of our industry will rise. So, I think it's very important that the Trade Watch Quarterly keeps focusing on labor-intensive and skill-intensive sectors. As a member has pointed out, in terms of area diversification, things are happening. But going up the value chain, now that's a completely different challenge. I think our interaction with ministries and stakeholders will hopefully help us be part of the journey that we need to go through. So Dr. Sahu, my thanks to you and your team for the hard work that this represents. CEO, member and others, thank you for being here.